Hello, my name is Erin Block, and we are here today with Kristin Collins from the Office of Higher Education. She will be talking with you today about financial aid, how it works, what it is, and how to access it through the FAFSA.
I'll get started. So the Office of Higher Ed, if you haven't heard of it, we're a cabinet level state agency, and we provide students with financial aid programs and then information to help them gain access to post-secondary education. And we're also the state's clearinghouse for data and research and analysis on post-secondary enrollment, financial aid, finance, and other trends. So that's a little bit about what we do. Our website's at the bottom, and Erin has a copy of this too. So you can go on here to find all kinds of different information about financial aid and choosing a college and choosing a career. There's a lot of good information on there. We also have a lot of videos that are on YouTube about how to fill out the FAFSA, how to pick a college. And so if you just go to YouTube and search Office of Higher Ed Minnesota, then you should be able to find those too. So what is financial aid? Well, it's money that's awarded to students who've demonstrated they have a financial need based on their FAFSA application. And for those of you who don't have visual, I'm going to go over just about everything, so you shouldn't miss anything. So the FAFSA is free application for federal and state aid. You should never have to pay to fill this out. It's always free to fill out. Some people will accidentally go to FAFSA.org instead of FAFSA.gov, and then they'll say, $20 to fill it out or something like that. But you'll get the same result whether you pay someone or you don't. So we tell people never pay anyone to fill it out. It's always free. So the financial aid that you'll get from filling out the FAFSA falls into 4 categories. Grants, this is free money from the federal and state government and the institution. Scholarships, work study, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but that's money that's provided by the government to pay students to work at the college. And then loans. And I tell people that the loans that you're offered through the FAFSA are what I call good loans. They're government and institution loans, and they often have low interest rates. You don't have to start paying them back often until after you graduate. So they're a good option as opposed to the private loans from Wells Fargo and other institutions like that. Work study is, again, working on campus. And I tell students that we really prefer that students, so when you fill out the FAFSA, there's a little checkbox for work study. Always check it. It's not going to take away any free money. It might lower the amount of loans you're eligible for, but you can always trade that work study back in for loans if you're not going to use it. But if you are looking for a campus job, always check the work study box. Work study jobs are generally pay a little bit better. They're pretty flexible. So I've had students that would work like 2 or 3 hours a day because they know that you're a student first. You're getting a lot of really good work experience, and your bosses are really about student development and professional development, which might be different than, say, working at the Mall of America or a restaurant. And if you have work study, people want to hire you more because the government is basically paying your wage. So you're more affordable for an employer to hire, so there's more student jobs available to you. So I'm a big proponent of work study. It's a great opportunity if students get that. So who receives financial aid? Well, it's families that have little or no money to attend. So the federal government and the state government believes that it's the family's obligation to provide as much financial support as they can for their child to attend school. So when they're not able to, financial aid can be awarded to them. I've had students that say, my parents have enough money to help me, but they don't want to. And I always tell them, as far as the government is concerned, they expect the family. They feel like it's the family's obligation. So even if your parents refuse to help you, you still have to use their taxes. The government is still considering them still feeling that they are obligated to help the student. So that will affect your financial aid. So how is the aid amount determined? Well, by filling out the F.A.F.S.A. So when you fill out the F.A.F.S.A, it goes to 3 different places. It goes to the federal government, the state government, and then any of the institutions you list on your F.A.F.S.A. And you can list up to 10 initially. You can add more if you need to, but there's space in the F.A.F.S.A for about 10. And then each of these places decide how much money they're going to give. I tell students, even if you don't think you're eligible for state or federal aid, still fill out the F.A.F.S.A because it goes to the college, and they decide whether there might be institutional aid that you're eligible for. So the F.A.F.S.A is used to determine the amount of financial need an individual student has for attending college. So once you fill out the F.A.F.S.A, you're going to be given what they call an EFC, and that's an estimated family contribution. Just an estimate of what the government expects the family to contribute. So next they subtract the estimated family contribution from the cost of attendance at that particular school, and then that results in the amount of financial aid that's awarded. So say you're going to the U. The cost of attendance there is about $33,000, but we'll just say $30,000. We'll use a nice round number. So the cost of attendance, and that includes tuition and fees, books, housing, meals, everything that you need to be a student for a year, is $30,000. And say your EFC, or your expected family contribution, is $5,000. So 30,000 minus 5,000, and then the amount of financial aid that's awarded would then be 25,000, if that makes sense. The school that you attend will award grants and work study and loans and scholarships to you based off of your need and the amount of aid they still have remaining each year. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to the importance of the deadline. But some aid is first come, first served, like work study and institutional scholarships. So who fills out the F.A.F.S.A? Well, any student who's seeking financial aid in order to attend college, and both the student and the parent fill out the form. The only reason a student wouldn't need their parents' tax information is if they've been emancipated from their parents, and then they need to have the documentation to show that. In that event, the parents' tax information, income, assets would not be a factor. So all students are considered dependent unless they're emancipated, they're in the military, they have a child who they pay for more than 50% of the child's needs, they're married, they're in grad school, or they're over 24. So those are the only cases where a student could be independent and not use their parents' taxes. Unfortunately, undocumented students and families don't qualify for federal aid at this time, so they don't need to fill out the F.A.F.S.A, but there is still hope through the DREAM Act, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this presentation. So when to complete your F.A.F.S.A? It's available to start after October 1st if you're senior year of high school. That's when you need to fill out the F.A.F.S.A every year. You need to fill out the F.A.F.S.A every year that you attend college and you want to receive financial aid. And again, it starts October 1st. And you'll use taxes from 2 years prior. So one thing to keep in mind is if your financial situation has changed from 2 years ago, which many people it has with COVID, you can work with the financial aid office at the school to complete a change of circumstance petition. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but I like to say there's a petition for everything at college. And so if that's more reflective of your income, I'd encourage you to reach out to the financial aid offices of the schools you apply to and ask them about that change of circumstance so you get a more accurate financial aid award estimate when the time comes. So the deadline for filling out the FAFSA is June 30th, the year before you plan to attend. I have had students fill it out later than that, say they weren't sure or they had trouble, they weren't sure if they were going to go or they had trouble getting their parents' taxes, and they still received federal and state grants if they were eligible. The big difference was they missed out on some of that institutional money and the work study money. So it's important to fill it out as soon as you can. There's also something called verification that students are randomly selected for. And that's just the government saying, we want you to verify that all the information you gave us on the FAFSA is accurate. So if you get selected for verification, you often have to supply like them with W-2s and all of that stuff. So it's good to fill it out early so you have a lot of time to get all of that stuff. Kind of a little tip that I would use with my students is I would have them request a tax transcript online, and it's free through the IRS. And then you have that in case they just mail it to you and you have it in case you get selected for verification, and you can just submit that. So that makes it a little easier. But again, fill out your FAFSA as early as possible. Because some of the money does run out. So both the student and the parents have to get an F.A.F.S.A ID by creating an account at this link. And once you get your F.A.F.S.A ID, put it in your cell phone, take a picture of it, put it somewhere safe because you'll need that every year. There's also a whole list of required documentation that you will need, including the F.A.F.S.A ID. So you'll need your Social Security or alien registration number. You'll need your federal income tax returns, W-2s, other records of money earned, bank statements, and records of untaxed income. Most folks just need their Social Security number and then like to know how much they have in their bank account and any other untaxed income. Because, and Erin, you might have to help me because I might blank on the name again, the IRS retrieval tool. That's what it's called.
Good job.
So when you fill out the FAFSA, there's a direct link to the IRS retrieval tool, and they pull in all of your information from the IRS to the FAFSA. So as long as you have filed electronically, and even if you had someone do your taxes, chances are they filed electronically, you'll be able to use that tool, and it's really great. It saves people a lot of time. This year, there's a new phone application that's available, so you can complete the FAFSA on your phone. You just download this from the Play Store or wherever. The middle icon kind of shows you all the sections of the FAFSA: student information, student selection, dependency status, parent information, and then the financials. And then the third kind of picture here, if you see at the bottom there's a contact us link. So if you get stuck or you have questions, you can contact someone for help. You can also save your FAFSA so you don't have to complete it all in one sitting. If you need to go back with more information, you can certainly do that. Okay, so let's talk about grants. Grants are free money awarded based on financial need, and this would be like the federal Pell Grant, the state grant, and then colleges or institutions have their own grants too. Some of these grants are awarded year after year, and some are only awarded for 1 year. So be aware of this when you get your financial aid award estimate, and communicate with the financial aid office to find out, what that actually looks like. I'll also say that the federal Pell Grant and the state grant are awarded for different amounts of time. So it's a bit of a complicated process, but the federal Pell Grant is awarded for around 6 years, depending on like how many credits you're taking and everything. And then the state grant is awarded for about 4 years. The thing with the state grant, though, is once you start receiving it, the clock doesn't stop ticking. So if you take a year off or a term off, you kind of lose out on that term or that year. So that's something good to know. Most grants also have eligibility requirements that you have to maintain semester to semester or year to year. Oftentimes with the federal and state ones, this is like GPA requirements. And they're kind of in line with academic GPA requirements. So for a lot of students, it's like a 2.0 or a 2.5, depending on the institution. And that's like around a C average. And if a student falls below that for a term, they could be placed on what's called financial aid probation. What that means is the institution's just warning you, we see you had a tough term. Next term, you need to bring your grades up in order to keep getting financial aid. If they don't bring their grades up the next term, they could be placed on financial aid suspension, and that would mean their financial aid would be taken away. It wouldn't mean they would have to pay anything back necessarily that term, but the next term they wouldn't get financial aid if they didn't lift their grades up. Now, as I said before, at college there's a petition for everything. And a lot of students have like an extenuating circumstance, an illness, death in the family, something like that. And so they can petition with their advisor to get their financial aid back. And I've seen way more successful petitions than unsuccessful ones. So I encourage you, if your child gets into this situation or you get into this situation, for the students out there, to just be in touch with your advisor, your financial aid office. And then grants don't have to be repaid unless you become ineligible. I've never seen this happen. There's only one instance I can think of where it would happen, and that's related to the TEACH grant for teachers. If you receive that grant and then you don't end up teaching, you have to pay it back. But I've never seen it happen. It's very rare. So not something to be worried about, but something to be aware of. And then the loans, obviously they're borrowed money from the government or private lenders that have to be paid back with interest. So I would avoid private lenders unless you have to. They often have higher interest rates and strict regulations for how to pay them back. But some of the government loans and the university loans are, again, not like those good loans. Subsidized loans are awarded based on financial need, and you have to be part-time, and interest does not accrue while you're in school. After, I think it's about 6 months after you graduate or you stop going to school or you drop down to less than half-time status, you have to start paying them. Unsubsidized loans do have an interest rate. They do accrue interest while you're in school, but it's a very low interest rate. And then again, you don't have to start paying those back until after you graduate. Or if you drop down to less than half-time or stop out. So those are both good options. So this is what a sample award letter might look like. Let me just kind of zoom in for those of you that can see. On the left side, we have tuition fees, housing and meals, books and supplies. That again, all of those things make up the cost of attendance, and that's about $18,000, almost $19,000 at St. Cloud State. Below that, we have the free money that they're offering. So they've got the Pell Grant, the state grant, and then other scholarships. This particular student is being offered a little over $10,000 in that free money, those grants and scholarships. So although the cost of attendance is almost $19,000, they're getting about $10,000 of it in free money. And I like to tell folks the cost of attendance can look scary, but people almost never pay kind of that ticket price. They often receive aid that helps to kind of level that out. On the right side, it'll show aid you do repay or loans. And you can see the students being offered about $6,500 in loans. So their remaining balance per year is about $1,900. So out of the tuition and fees and books and supplies, that cost of attendance that was $19,000, they would end up paying out of pocket based on their expected family contribution, about $1,900, and they'd have 6,500 in enrollments per year. Now, you don't have to take all that out. The only thing the school is going to charge you, unless you're in campus housing and getting, meals and everything, the only thing they're going to send you a bill for is that tuition and fees. And the tuition and fees here are about $8,600. So they got enough free money to pay for all their tuition and fees. The housing, meals, and books and supplies are flexible depending on the student. So how do we manage the cost of college? There's some things that you can do to make it more affordable. Attending college in your home state can lower costs because of in-state tuition being lower, and you're eligible for the state grant if you are if you're income eligible. So that's one option. 77% of students work at least part of the year. We do encourage that. Students working in school, it helps them to manage their time. But we want students to be cautious. And research indicates that about 12 hours a week is kind of the sweet spot for working while you're in school. And then 49% of students live at home. And that's good for students, and it's not good for others. We know when students live on campus, they're more engaged. They statistically do a little bit better in school. But for some students, that's not a good fit, and it's a better fit to live at home. So that's a personal kind of choice that students make. Some students attend community college as a first step. So you can do that to save money. Something interesting about the community college is if students attend that for a year or so, then the university that they want to transfer to will look at their GPA from the community college, and they won't need like an ACT or a high school GPA. So they just look at the community college GPA if you have significant time there. So something to think about. Cutting down on personal spending and then working towards earning a degree faster. Some students are doing that. I will say, however, when we're thinking about being marketable to employers after graduation, it's important that students have kind of a little bit more of a holistic experience or approach to college. What I mean by that is that employers like to see they don't like to see just students with 4.0s and no work experience. They'd rather a student have some work experience, have some lived experience, like study abroad. These things kind of show leadership and commitment and resiliency, and employers like to see that. So, I tell students to think of your college experience as kind of an investment in yourself, and kind of in your future and making yourself marketable for employers after you graduate. The next slide is just based on yearly tuition in Minnesota. And I'm sorry that it says tuition. It's cost of attendance that's listed here in the bottom half. So the U of M is about $33,000 for the whole cost of attendance. That's tuition fees, books, housing, meals, all of that. And then you see Carleton College is $57,000 for all that. And that's a private college. What I tell folks is that private colleges often offer more institutional aid than public ones do. So don't let the cost dissuade you from just putting it on your FAFSA and applying and seeing, what they offer you. Once you get your financial aid award estimate, you can make an informed decision about where you want to go. But Carleton might end up being cheaper than the U of M, depending on what aid they offer. So you really don't know until you get that award estimate. You should expect those definitely before the deadline to apply. But the earlier, obviously, you fill up the FAFSA, the earlier you'll get it. But you should get them before April. So just a little bit about the DREAM Act that we talked about earlier. There's a link on our website about the Minnesota DREAM Act. So you can check it out there. But what this means is students that are undocumented and meet all the requirements, they qualify for in-state tuition rates at Minnesota State colleges and universities and the U of M. They get the state grant. And then there's privately funded scholarships that they're eligible for too. So if you or someone you know falls into this category, you'll definitely want to follow up and click on that link. There's a lot of different scholarships for folks that recognize it's not equitable that some people don't get the federal grant too. So keep that in mind. And then folks always ask, like, how has COVID affected applying? And it really hasn't affected applying to school that much. As I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing at work, the wait times are longer. It takes people a little longer to respond to emails or phone messages when they're working from home. And then some schools are no longer requiring the ACT or the SAT. So check in with your counselor. This is not all schools, but it's some of them, and so you can see what their recommendation is.
Thank you for joining us today. Some closing reminders and working through the FAFSA. If you have a senior, now is the time to start working on your FAFSA. The website to access the FAFSA is fafsa.gov. Your first step will be to create an F.A.F.S.A ID. Seniors need an ID, and one parent needs an ID. You'll need the following documents. They are required to complete the FAFSA, so have those ready and handy. Social Security number for the student and parent, alien registration number if the student is not a U.S. citizen, email accounts for both the student and parent is very helpful, an F.A.F.S.A ID, which you can create at the fafsa.gov website, tax returns for 2019 and W-2s associated with that for the parent and the student if the student was working. And finally, records of any untaxed income, investments, and bank statements if applicable. As always, you can reach out to the Office of Higher Education for additional resources and support at the phone number and website below. You can always reach out to your child's counselor for additional support, and if we can't help you, we will definitely direct you in the right place for support.